She asked me one question the first time we met, and I have never stopped being grateful for it. I had arrived in Varnstead on a gray October morning, dressed in plain wool, and riding a horse with no royal markings, the way I had learned to travel when I wanted to see something true. My steward had arranged it through a quiet intermediary, a pack elder named Rowan who owed a debt to a creditor named Bess, a hard woman with hard eyes who had been slowly swallowing the smaller packs of the eastern border. Rowan's pack was nearly gone. He had 2 daughters and no sons and nothing left to offer, except the older girl's hand to any man willing to take the debt from Bess's ledger. I had heard about the family 2 seasons earlier, through a report my counsel dismissed as ordinary, a daughter who had stood between Bess's enforcers and a litter of orphaned pups, alone at 16. A daughter who had given her own winter coat to a half-frozen Omega woman she did not know. My counsel called it sentiment. I called it the thing I had been looking for 11 years. I rode to Varnstead. Rowan met me at the gate of what was left of his holding. A few stone buildings, a bare yard, 2 old wolves lying in the last of the autumn grass. He was a proud man trying not to look like a broken one, and I respected him for the effort. He told me about the debt. He told me the terms. He did not look me in the eye when he spoke his daughter's name. I told him I would take the arrangement. He brought her out of the house. I had half expected someone resigned. Someone who would come out with her chin down and her hands folded, and the particular stillness of a person who has given up. Instead, she came through the door with her hair pinned simply and her coat buttoned wrong at the top, and she looked at me the way a person looks at a problem they intend to solve. Not afraid, not angry, measuring. She stopped a few feet away, and she said, "Are you a kind man? Not, are you wealthy? Not, will you keep the debt paid? Not even, what will become of me? Are you a kind man?" My wolf, who had not stirred for a woman in 11 years of searching, went so quiet inside me that I thought I had imagined him. Then I felt it, not the blaze I had expected, not the great flood of the mate bond breaking open, just a stillness, deep and certain, like a door that had always been there finally swinging on its hinge. I told her yes. I promised her I would try to be. She looked at me for another moment, then she said, "All right," and turned to tell her father she was ready. I married Mira of Varnstead 3 days later, in the old way, at the pack elder's hearth, with 2 witnesses and a short vow. She wore a dress the color of winter wheat, and she said the words steadily and without trembling. I said them back the same way. The bond did not blaze. It settled the way a fire settles when the wood is good and the hearth is deep, low and permanent and nothing that would ever go out. We moved into a small stone cottage at the edge of the village. I had told my guard wolves, 5 of them, posing as passing travelers, to keep their distance and to interfere with nothing unless Mira was in danger. They obeyed, though not without complaint. My steward, Ferris, sent me a letter that was mostly barely disguised alarm. I ignored it. Mira did not know what I was. She knew only that I was a man who had come to settle a debt, and that I was quiet, and that I did not expect her to be something she was not. She was in the way of women who have never had anything easy immediately practical. The first morning she woke before me and made a fire and cooked something plain and good, and when I came to the table she pushed a bowl toward me without ceremony and said, "Eat before it cools," as if we had been doing this for years. I sat down and ate, and I thought, this is the thing I have been missing. Not a throne room, not a ceremony. Just this, a bowl of something warm and a woman who hands it to you without asking for anything in return. I learned her in small pieces over those first weeks. She was not warm in the way the word is commonly used, not open or easy or quick to smile. She was warm the way a banked fire is warm, constant, reliable, there when you needed it. She checked on the 2 old wolves in her father's yard every morning, even after we moved, making the short walk before I was awake. She kept a crock of dried herbs by the door for anyone who came asking. No one came asking with money. She gave it anyway. She asked me very little about myself, not from disinterest. I understood that quickly enough. She had decided, in her practical way, that the man who had come to Varnstead and sat across from her father and said yes to a debt marriage was either honest or he was not, and she had already asked the question that mattered to her. She was waiting to see the answer lived rather than spoken. I was careful with my words. I was not careful enough with everything else. A man who has been a king for 11 years carries it in him, whether he means to or not, in the way he stands, the way he listens, the way the room arranges itself around him without his asking. Mira noticed. She said nothing for a long time. Then one evening she looked up from her sewing and said, "You are not what you told my father you were." It was not a question, I said. "No, but nothing I have shown you has been false." She considered that for a moment. Then she went back to her sewing and said, "All right," in exactly the same tone she had used at the altar, and I loved her for it so sharply it was almost a pain behind my ribs. The wolf arrived on a Tuesday, near the end of the 3rd week. He came to the cottage door at dusk, limping on one back leg, one of my guard wolves pretending an injury he did not have, because Ferris had finally run out of patience and sent him to make me come home. The wolf did not know Mira would be the one to open the door. He had expected me. She opened the door, saw the wolf, and said, "Oh, you poor thing," and went and got her medicine box before I could say a word. She worked in the last of the evening light, kneeling on the cold ground, talking to the wolf in the low, even voice she used for the old wolves at her father's yard. The wolf, Torin, 6 years in my guard, more scars than most of my soldiers, lay perfectly still under her hands and looked at me over her shoulder with an expression I can only describe. As informed, he knew. Of course he knew. They all knew. They had known from the first day. The mate mark on my wrist, which had been warming steadily for 3 weeks, blazed. Not a slow warmth this time, a full open blaze, gold under the skin, steady as a lit lamp. I pressed my sleeve down quickly. Too late. Mira felt it. She looked at my wrist and then at me, and her hands went still in Torin's fur. She said, quietly, "What is that?" I pushed back my sleeve. The mark was gold and clear, the shape it always takes when the bond is fully seen. 2 lines in a curl, the Lycan King seal, the one that only blooms when the mate is known and willing. Mira looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at her own wrist, where an identical mark had bloomed without either of us noticing faint gold in the dusk light. "That is yours too," I told her. She sat back on her heels. Torin lifted his head and leaned gently into her shoulder, which was the most dignified apology a wolf of his rank could offer. The others arrived before she had finished thinking. I heard them on the road first, horses, 6 of them, and Ferris at the front muttering under his breath about cottages and wool coats and 11. Years of patience. They came through the gate and stopped when they saw Mira sitting on the cold ground with Torin's head in her lap and my mark burning on her wrist. Ferris, to his credit, dismounted and bowed. The 5 guard wolves, in their human forms now, the pretense finished, bowed where they stood. Mira looked at them. She looked at me. She said with perfect evenness, "How much of my father's debt is actually a debt?" "None of it," I said. "I invented a reason to come." She was quiet for a moment. "And the man in the plain coat," she said. "Was he invented too?" I thought about that question seriously because she deserved a serious answer. "No," I said. "He is the truest thing I know how to be." Mira looked at me for a long time, the same measuring look she had given me the first day in. Her father's yard, the look that had cracked my heart open before I even knew her name. Then she said, "Are you a kind man?" The same question, word for word. I went down on one knee in the cold mud of the cottage yard, in front of my steward and my guard wolves in the last of the autumn light, and I took her hand and I told her yes. I promised her I would spend whatever time I had proving it. The mark blazed full on both our wrists. Torin huffed once as if to say, "Finally." She looked at our joined hands for a moment. Then she looked at me, and the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the thing that lives next to one. "All right," she said, "then I will come." We rode to Varnstead that evening first, before the great hall, before the ceremony, before any of it. I stood in her father's bare yard and I told Rowan that the debt was gone, and had always been gone. And I told Bess, who had arrived hoping to collect on some rumor of trouble, that her ledger in the eastern border packs was finished, and that if I heard her name, again in connection with his pack, or any other I would hear it at a tribunal. She left without a word. Rowan stood in the yard with his hands at his sides and looked at his daughter, and Mira looked back at him, and something passed between them that I did not try to name. We were married again in the great hall, in the full way, with the whole of my court as witness. Mira wore a dress the color of winter wheat, the same one because she had packed it herself, without being asked, folded at the top of her bag as if she had always known it would be needed again. She said the vows steadily, and without trembling, the same as the first time. I said them back the same way. Ferris wept. Torin, in the front row with the other guard wolves, looked insufferably pleased with himself. Mira's father bowed. The court bowed. Bess's name was never spoken in the eastern packs again. That night, in the quiet after the hall had emptied, Mira sat by the fire in our chamber, and I sat across from her, and she looked at me the way she had always looked at me, measuring, sure, a little amused, and she said, "You could have just asked." "I know," I said. 11 years. Yes, she shook her head. The way she shook her head at a practical problem that had been made unnecessarily complicated. Then she reached across and covered my hand with hers, and the mark on both our wrists glowed warm and low and steady, the way a banked fire glows. Constant, reliable, nothing that would ever go out. I had searched 11 years for a woman who would ask if I was a kind man before she asked anything else. I found her in a cottage yard in plain October light, with her coat buttoned wrong at the top, already deciding whether I was worth her answer. She was, she is, she will be as long as there is a fire to sit beside.